Hey guys, tonight we time travel into the soggy, scratchy, foot-blistered reality of Napoleon's soldiers, the ones who marched for miles in wet wool socks and still managed to conquer half of Europe, if not their athlete's foot. You're waking up on a cold French morning, nestled not in a memory foam mattress, but on damp earth beneath a scratchy canvas tent. Your back is already sore from sleeping on a musket, and your first conscious sensation is moisture. Not rain, not dew, just the relentless humidity that has soaked through your threadbare socks again. You sit up, brushing off a few twigs that have somehow found their way inside your shirt. The world is a blur of fog and gray. The fire's gone out. And next to you, your tentmate's snoring is louder than Napoleon's cannonballs. Your feet squelch in your boots. There it is again. Wet socks. Always the wet socks. See, in Napoleon's Grande Armée, comfort was optional, but marching was mandatory. They averaged 20 to 25 miles per day. Every step soaked in sweat, rain, mud, or the melted disappointment of snow in Poland. And that was on a good day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You tug your boots off with effort, releasing a puff of steam and something dangerously close to a war crime. Wet, woolen socks cling to your feet like damp bandages. You're not alone in this misery. Across the tent, someone's already wringing theirs out over a dented tin mug. The smell alone could turn away an entire cavalry charge. In the early 1800s, the standard issue sock was wool, thick, scratchy, and remarkably absorbent. Once wet, it stayed wet. 4 days. Cotton was a luxury, silk was for officers. And you? You were lucky if yours matched. Even then, one was probably stretched out from doubling as a mitten the night before. Historians still argue whether the French supply system was brilliant or delusional. On paper, Napoleon's commissariat could move whole armies with synchronized deliveries of bread, boots, bullets, and yes, socks. In reality, supply wagons got stuck, delayed, or looted by hungry locals. So you made do. You bartered, you patched holes with hay, and once, you may have stolen a dry pair off a sleeping drummer boy. You don't feel great about it. Napoleon himself rose early, wrapped in military precision. But you? You rose in damp confusion, staring at your sock-covered toes like they had betrayed you in the night. And the worst part? This wasn't even battle. This was just Tuesday. Outside, bugles bleat like confused goats. The column starts forming. Coffee, if it exists, is thin and bitter. Bread's gone stale. But what really distracts you is the slosh with every step inside your boots. You consider taking off your socks entirely. Then remember Corporal Brune's blackened toes last winter and change your mind. Socks, it turns out, were life or death. Frostbite took men faster than bullets. In summer, blisters turned septic in days. And those lucky enough to survive got something charmingly called marching foot, where skin peeled like overcooked onions. Still better than trench foot, which left a trail of amputated toes all the way back to Paris. There's a young recruit behind you. He's crying. Not from fear, though there's that, but from the realization that he's worn the same socks for 3 weeks. He thinks they're talking to him now. He might not be wrong. And through it all, the world around you marches. Forests blur past. Villages smell like smoke and cabbages. Horses snort. Cannons creak. Your sock squelches again. Somewhere ahead, an officer yells in clipped French. You can't make out the words, but you don't need to. The march continues. You adjust your gait to favor the heel with the hole in it. No one talks about the glory of the Grande Armée's socks. But they should. You wore them until they dissolved, until they fused with your skin, until the idea of dry was just a bedtime story. And that, really, is where this bedtime story begins. You trudge along the gravel road, every step grinding another layer of skin from your heel. It's still early morning, but the damp from your socks has spread, up your ankles, into your boots, and right into your very soul. A soldier ahead mutters about marching disease, which sounds made up until you realize you probably already have it. There's a reason Napoleon's armies were infamous for their endurance. They didn't just walk, they marched with robotic rhythm, mile after miserable mile, rain or shine or sleet. And with every step, your boots rubbed deeper into your skin. By the end of the week, you've collected blisters like medals. Historians still argue whether the so-called marching disease was a real condition or just battlefield melodrama. But your left foot doesn't care. It's raw, tender, and vaguely resembles a badly overcooked potato. Some say it was a mix of infected blisters, tendon stress, and general neglect. Others chalk it up to pure overuse. You just want a chair. The medical system, such as it was, focused on gunshots and amputations. Feet? That was between you and God. Or whatever God handled socks. Probably a cruel one. You remember a grizzled veteran once advising you to rub vinegar into your soles to toughen the skin. Another swore by soaking them in brandy. You tried both. All you got was ants and regret. To cope, soldiers developed their own rituals. Some swapped socks every few hours. Some carried second pairs strapped to their hats for sun drying on the go. A few brave souls went barefoot during rest periods, hoping fresh air would heal what medicine ignored. Of course, walking barefoot in Napoleon's army meant dodging horse dung, jagged rocks, and occasional surprise cannonballs. The problem wasn't just distance, it was speed. Napoleon's armies moved fast, lightning fast, for their time. His troops were drilled to cover ground quicker than their enemies expected. Speed meant surprise, and surprise won battles. But it also meant your blisters never healed. They simply layered. Like soggy onion rings. Your sergeant once told you that a slow soldier was a dead one. That kept your feet moving. That, and fear of being trampled by the horse artillery behind you. Or worse, being reassigned to kitchen duty, where you'd have to peel 10,000 potatoes with the same knife used to scrape someone's bunion. You recall one campaign where it rained for 9 days straight. Socks never dried. Feet turned white and wrinkled like ancient scrolls. And when the sun finally came out, it cooked the moisture into something science still refuses to classify. Even crows avoided you. Still, there were bright spots. A dry day. A shallow stream where you could rinse the mud off. A comrade offering you their last bit of cloth to wrap your heels. And when you sat down at night, if you were lucky enough to sit, you'd peel off your socks like old wallpaper and hang them by the fire. Assuming you hadn't already used them to filter your wine ration, which, yes, some soldiers did. Historians still debate whether this was desperation or innovation. You knew a drummer who lined his boots with cabbage leaves. Claimed it worked better than wool. Smelled worse, though. Another stitched linen into footpads, but it didn't hold long under the weight of reality, or wet clay. The worst part of marching wasn't the pain. It was knowing the pain had no destination. You'd walk for hours, sometimes days, without seeing anything but trees and smoke. And at night, your dreams weren't of home or victory, but of dry, warm socks. Thick ones. Maybe with reinforced heels. You'd wake up crying, and so would the man next to you. But on you go. Because Napoleon never stopped, and neither did his orders. You marched until your socks unraveled, your toenails blackened, and your boots took on life of their own. They squeaked when they shouldn't. They smelled like roasted despair. And yet, you marched. One morning, a lieutenant collapses from exhaustion. His boot comes off during the fall. A wet sock flies through the air and lands on someone's breakfast. No one even reacts. You just keep eating. That's what war does. And still, the road continues. You're not sure how long you've been walking. Time melts underfoot, along with the last shreds of your sock's dignity. You've worn the same pair for weeks, and now, as you finally pause for a midday rest beside a muddy stream, you begin the sacred ritual, removing the sock. Slowly, carefully. Like disarming a trap. It peels away with a squelch, revealing a foot that looks not quite human. A little gray. A little swollen. But miraculously still attached. You sniff the sock out of morbid curiosity, instantly regret it, and drop it like it bit you. Welcome to the secret life of Napoleonic socks. Back in barracks, socks were hoarded like gold. Soldiers swapped stories of the warmest pair they'd ever worn, like old men reminiscing about lost loves. You once knew a grenadier who kept a diary, not about battles or glory, but about each pair of socks he'd owned. He rated them on softness, stretch, and survivability. His highest rating? Lasted 3 campaigns and only gave 2 infections. Socks had personality. There were the good luck ones who only wore on Sundays. The emergency pair you sewed from blanket scraps. The single orphan sock that never left your pack, just in case its mate one day returned from war. You almost believed it would. Historians still argue whether this sock obsession was psychological survival or genuine necessity. After all, socks weren't just clothing, they were insulation, padding, tourniquet, rag, washcloth, makeshift tea strainer, don't ask, and occasionally, glove. Yes, glove. You once saw a man fire a musket with socks on both hands because frostbite had already claimed his fingers. He didn't hit anything, but we all clapped anyway. The French army technically issued 3 pairs of socks per man. Technically. But with thousands of soldiers and hundreds of miles to march, supply lines had all the reliability of a leaky canoe. So soldiers patched, bartered, and sometimes even stole socks. Not from the enemy, that would be weird, but from their own comrades, especially after nightfall. One notorious practice was the sock flip. If your bunkmate snored too loud, you flipped his socks inside out as revenge. This did nothing but spread trench fungus faster than gossip. But it felt good. Small victories. You once shared a tent with a Polish lancer who swore by rotating his socks hourly. Claimed it let them dry while still on his feet. He'd twist them like pretzels, muttering prayers to St. Crispin, patron of cobblers and, unofficially, damp toes. He never got a blister, though his socks smelled like pickled onions. Historians still debate whether his method was genius or folklore. Sock quality also varied wildly. Some were hand-knit by nuns. Others were bulk-produced with all the care of a broken loom. One famously awful batch was so itchy it caused desertion. True or not, the army had to investigate the wool incident of '04. You remember it. Everyone limped for weeks from sheer irritation. There were sock hacks, too. Stuffing them with straw in winter. Tying them around your neck as a scarf. Using them as padding between shoulder and musket. You even witnessed a man propose to a washerwoman by offering her his cleanest pair. She declined, but only because she already had 6 proposals that week, and 1 actual pair of shoes. The washerwomen, by the way, were saints. Traveling with the baggage train, they scrubbed uniforms, boiled lice, and, yes, washed socks. If you were lucky, you got yours back the same week. If you were unlucky, they returned stiffer than your bayonet. One tale told of a sock washed so vigorously, it shrank to fit a doll. That didn't stop its owner from wearing it. On 2 toes. By now, your own socks are dry, sort of. You squeeze out the last of the stream water, lay them on a sun-warmed rock, and hope a bird doesn't mistake them for nesting material. They're riddled with holes, but still yours. You once tried darning them with horsehair. It worked until the hair poked through and stabbed your ankle with every step. Still better than the time you tried to stitch them with your own beard. You glance around. Others are tending to their own sock-related rituals. Hanging pairs from musket barrels. Tucking them into warm bread for heat, don't ask. A few men are even playing cards with socks as currency. One soldier bets his best wool sock, immediately loses it, and spends the rest of the week wearing a handkerchief around his foot like a limp bandage of shame. You stretch. The road ahead glistens in the sun. You wriggle your toes in the grass, savoring this brief reprieve. Then, with a resigned sigh, you tug the socks back on, 1 stitch at a time. The march is about to resume. And your feet, tragically, are still very much a part of it. You're back on the road, boots tight and socks reluctantly clinging to your feet like damp regret. But now your mind turns to something more pressing than blisters, your stomach. It growls with the melancholy of a man who's already eaten every crust, crumb, and questionable root in his knapsack. Ahead, someone mentions rations. You sigh. You know what's coming. Bread. Again. But this wasn't the warm, crusty, baguette-style bread of French cafes. Oh no! The standard army bread was hard, dense, and had a shelf life rivaling geological formations. They called it biscuit de guerre, war biscuit, though edible masonry would have been more honest. You could hammer a tense steak with it. You probably had. To eat it, you had to soak it first, water, wine, coffee, soup, your own tears, anything to soften the stone. Otherwise, your teeth might end up in your lap. Historians still argue whether this bread was meant to feed you or discipline your jawline. But here's the fun part, bread also doubled as a weapon. Seriously. There's at least 1 recorded instance of a soldier throwing his stale ration during a brawl and knocking out a fellow infantryman. A legend spread of a grenadier who used it as a bludgeon against a Cossack. No idea if it's true, but it made for great marching song verses. And speaking of marching, Try chomping rock bread while walking in wet socks. It's like chewing chalk while someone hits your toes with sticks. So, you'd improvise. Some soldiers crumbled the bread into soup. Others fried it in pork grease. A few rubbed garlic on it and pretended it was rustic cuisine. One overconfident soul added gunpowder, claimed it made the flavor pop. It did. So did his canteen. Rations were monotonous. Bread. Salted meat. Occasionally cheese so old it developed opinions. And always cabbage. You once had a dream where every meal was cabbage. You woke up sweating and hungry. Food theft wasn't uncommon. Soldiers hid biscuits in socks, boots, or even in their hats. You once caught a man baking flatbread over a candle and using his belt as a pan. Another lined his coat with old cheese for warmth. The coat never recovered. Hunger made men creative. In one winter campaign, soldiers made a stew out of leather scraps, dried beetroot, and snow. They called it Napoleon's Delight. No one was delighted. And yes, someone tried eating socks. Boiled them in salt water. Claimed it was like squid. You still have nightmares. One quartermaster tried introducing lentils as a protein option. The idea lasted until 3 regiments experienced synchronized stomach rebellion. A trail of despair followed them for miles. Horses refused to follow. You also remember mystery meat, an unidentifiable protein that turned up occasionally in your tin bowl. It could have been rabbit, or squirrel, or extremely adventurous pigeon. Historians still debate what that meat actually was, especially since even the cooks didn't know. And then, once in a blue moon, someone's package from home would arrive. The whole unit would gather like moths to candlelight as a cloth-wrapped bundle was unknotted. You'd all lean in, eyes wide. Cheese! Real cheese! Preserved cherries! A warm loaf wrapped in linen. But by the time the sender reached into the bundle, half of it had mysteriously vanished. Mail was sacred, but hunger was holier. Even Napoleon understood the value of food. He famously said an army marches on its stomach. Though after tasting some of the stew you once had, you'd argue his army more accurately limped on a stomachache. Still, supply was everything. Troops couldn't fight if they couldn't chew. There were some odd traditions, too. Soldiers believed breaking bread with a comrade before battle brought luck. You'd sit around a fire, dipping biscuit chunks into warm broth, chewing slowly and silently, pretending it didn't taste like despair. And in those quiet moments, you found comfort. The bread was hard. The boots were soaked. But here, under a bruised sky, you were not alone. Your messmate, Henri, once drew a face on his bread with charcoal. Called it Captain Crumb. Carried it in his coat for days, confiding in it like a confidant. One night, he ate it in silence. Never spoke of it again. So you chew now, slowly, thoughtfully, because every bite feels like a ceremony. A tooth-wrecking, flavorless, jaw-tightening ceremony. But there's a strange dignity in it. You, a soldier, in wet socks and sunburned sleeves, still marching, still chewing, still surviving. Because even when everything else was broken, swords, cannons, politics, bread endured. Bread, and the eternal hope that someday, maybe, it would finally be soft. You think you've adjusted. You've accepted the blisters, the cabbage, the bread that might double as a roofing tile. But nothing prepares you for the mystery that is Napoleon's personal bathroom routine. You see, when you march across Europe, conquering kingdoms and collecting frostbite, you start to wonder, when did the emperor go? And more importantly, how? Did he squat behind a rock like the rest of you? Did he have a golden chamber pot engraved with the names of fallen monarchs? Was there a schedule? Turns out, there was. Napoleon, famously disciplined and punctual, maintained a routine tighter than your bootlaces. His valet noted that the emperor rose at 7 a.m., drank weak tea, scribbled orders, and then, like clockwork, vanished for a very particular 15 minutes. This happened daily, regardless of battlefield noise, assassination attempts, or surprise blizzards. Historians still argue whether it was purely biological precision or a psychological control mechanism. You suspect the tea had something to do with it. You once witnessed the commotion firsthand. An entire squad was rerouted around a grove because His Majesty is reflecting. That's what the guards called it, reflecting. You've never seen a man reflect so consistently behind the same bush. Meanwhile, for you and the rest of the rank and file, bathroom logistics were less elegant. The standard issue was find a bush. Failing that, a trench or a tree would do. Privacy was rare. Dignity? Extinct. And socks, unfortunately, often became collateral damage. One misplaced step in the pre-dawn dark, and suddenly your only dry pair was a casualty. Worse still were the marches through flat, open plains, no trees, no hills, just miles of exposed fields. You learned to be quick, strategic, creative. One time, you used your upturned helmet as a screen. The next day, you wore that same helmet into battle. War is many things. Hygienic is not one of them. But Napoleon? He had his own chair. Literally. A portable latrine throne carried by servants. It looked like a fancy stool, but lifted to reveal a chamber pot. He reportedly used it while reading reports, adjusting battle plans, or even discussing troop movements. Talk about multitasking. You remember a story shared around campfires, possibly true, possibly invented after too much wine, of Napoleon berating a general while seated on that very throne. They say the general flinched not at the criticism, but at the smell. Power, it seems, had a scent. There was also the infamous vinegar incident. During the Italian campaign, supplies ran low, and someone decided vinegar could double as a cleanser. You were told to dab it on areas of concern. It stung. Badly. A lieutenant screamed so loud during application, it triggered a false alarm and had half the regiment grabbing muskets. Historians debate whether this vinegar practice was hygienic innovation or just pure masochism. Of course, if you were lucky enough to be near a river, everything changed. A cool stream offered not only relief from heat but also a chance to wash yourself, your uniform, even your socks. You'd strip down, splash cold water on your face, and soak your feet until the numbness faded. One time, a goat stole your trousers mid-wash. It was your favorite goat. And yet, the more you think about it, the more you appreciate the emperor's routine. Amid all the chaos, the cannon blasts, the dysentery, the relentless marching, he carved out that 15-minute moment of predictable privacy. Maybe that's why he won so many battles. Not because he was smarter or braver, but because he pooped on schedule. Meanwhile, you're crouched behind a bush, praying the wind doesn't shift. The officers had it better. Some even had folding screens. You once saw a general use his fur coat as a modesty curtain. The coat never looked the same. You later inherited it. You burned it. And then there were the communal pits, dug hastily at the edge of camp, marked by a single stick. No one guarded them. No one cleaned them. Sometimes you sat there, staring at the stars, socks pulled around your ankles, wondering how civilization had come to this. But afterward, you'd lace up again, squish back into your boots, and keep marching. Because if Napoleon could sit on a throne in the middle of a battlefield and still plan a full-scale invasion of Austria, then surely you could survive one more mile with wet feet and wounded pride. Besides, tomorrow's another day. Another chance to find a dry bush. By now, you've learned to dread any mention of Russia. The older soldiers talk about it with a faraway look, like they've stared into an abyss and found it wearing icicles. You're not even there yet, but already you've heard enough stories to make your wet socks curl in preemptive agony. When Napoleon marched on Russia in 1812, he took with him over 600,000 men. By the time they limped home, fewer than a tenth returned. And if you're wondering what destroyed them, yes, bullets and bayonets did their share, but it was the cold. The kind of cold that takes your breath away, then your fingers, then your mind. And your socks? They didn't stand a chance. You trudged through snowy plains, boots stiff with ice, and every step sends a jolt of frostbite up your legs. Your socks are frozen solid, bent in shapes nature never intended. You once tried thawing them near a fire and nearly started a sock-shaped blaze. One soldier toasted his too long and had to march 3 days with nothing but cabbage leaves stuffed into his boots. He called it salad footwear. Historians still debate whether this was desperation or early veganism. In Russia, the rules changed. Your foot care routine went from try not to get blisters to try not to lose a toe. You saw men rubbing snow on their soles, thinking it would numb the pain. It did, along with the rest of their feet. By morning, blackened toes snapped off like dry twigs. Napoleon's command struggled to adapt. Supply lines froze. Horses dropped. Cannons got stuck. And you? You kept walking. Because if you stopped for more than 10 minutes, your blood slowed. And then, well, you've seen what happens. Fires were sacred. The tiniest flame attracted dozens of men, everyone desperate for warmth, for a chance to unfreeze their socks and their sanity. You learned to rotate your boots near the heat like you were roasting a chicken. One misstep and you'd melt the leather or scorch your soles. It was a fine line between comfort and cooked foot. And then there was the urine trick. Yes, urine. Don't flinch, you probably tried it. In the worst moments, men resorted to peeing on their socks to keep warm. It wasn't ideal. It wasn't sanitary. But when your toes were on the verge of snapping off, you did what you had to do. A sergeant once proudly claimed he hadn't felt cold in days. Turned out he'd just grown numb to the smell. You developed an intimate relationship with your feet. Each morning, you'd inspect them with the solemnity of a doctor. Are they pink? Good. Blue? Bad. Gray? Start praying. You'd rub them, slap them, breathe on them, talk to them. Yes, talk. One soldier named his left foot Marie and whispered French lullabies to it every night. Marie didn't make it. At one point, a rumor spread that stuffing your boots with tobacco would keep them dry. You tried it. Your boots smelled like a rebellious ashtray. Another claimed vodka baths worked. No one had vodka. Someone tried wine. That man hasn't been seen since. You remember one night, deep in the Russian woods, when frost crept over your blankets. Your socks had frozen stiff, so you tucked them inside your shirt to thaw. You woke up with one missing. Never found it. Either the wind took it, or someone did. Yes, sock theft in the Russian campaign was rampant. You'd wake up and find one gone. You'd look over and see your comrade casually wearing a sock that looked suspiciously familiar. But what could you do? Start a duel over hosiery? Actually, yes. That happened once. The duel was short. Neither man could stay upright. They kept slipping on the snow. In the end, they agreed to share the sock. They cut it in half. It was a terrible idea. Napoleon, meanwhile, stayed warm in layered coats and fur-lined boots. He had bare pelts, personal fires, a silver foot warmer. And you? You had a damp scarf and hope. Historians still argue whether Napoleon underestimated the Russian winter or just overestimated his men's resilience. Either way, the result was the same: frostbitten feet, soggy socks, and a slow, shivering retreat. You march on. Your toes are numb, your boots full of slush, your breath a ghost in the air. Each step is agony, but stopping is worse. And all you can think about is how much you give, how much anyone would give, for one clean, dry pair of socks. So there you are, somewhere between starving and freezing, marching across a continent in boots that have absorbed more weather than most rooftops. When it finally hits you, you don't look like the soldier you used to be. In fact, your uniform looks like it was assembled during a blackout by someone with no sense of symmetry or fabric. Welcome to the wonderful world of mismatched clothing and jacket envy. The Grande Armée started out glorious. Clean blue coats, brass buttons polished to a blinding shine, epaulets stiff with starch and pride. But then came marching. Rain. Mud. Hunger. Socks turned gray. Jackets frayed. And replacements? Well, those were as rare as warm beds. So you improvise. You remember receiving a replacement sleeve, just the sleeve. No jacket, just an Austrian green arm sewn awkwardly onto your tattered French blue. You looked like a patriotic patchwork quilt. And you weren't alone. A Polish lancer strutted by once wearing a Dutch cavalry cape, Spanish trousers, and no shoes. Said he was making a statement. Historians still debate whether he was fashion-forward or just delirious. The problem was supply. Or the lack of it. As armies grew and marched farther, clothing stores couldn't keep up. Uniform parts came from wherever possible: prisoners' kits, Allied regiments, looted wagons, or just the random box that fell off a mule somewhere in Bavaria. You once met a man wearing two right boots. Claimed it helped him march in circles less. He was wrong. Jacket envy became a real phenomenon. You'd see an officer walk by in pristine white gloves and triple-stitched lapels, and your entire unit would fall silent, not out of respect, but out of blistering jealousy. One man stared so long at a captain's coat that he walked straight into a tree. It wasn't just aesthetics. A good coat meant warmth. A dry jacket meant survival. Soldiers would gamble over epaulets. Some traded rations for overcoats. You once saw someone challenge a drummer boy to a wrestling match for his cloak. The drummer won. Laundry? Huh. You had two options: snow or hope. Washing uniforms usually meant kneeling by a stream and slapping cloth against stones until either the dirt or the fabric gave up. One winter, your jacket froze solid after a bath. It stood upright without you. You and your sock hung it like a scarecrow for 3 days until it softened enough to wear again. You got creative. Your messmate stitched parts of his blanket into his coat. You turned a dead horse's saddlecloth into a waist wrap. One man wore an entire tent panel like a toga. He looked ridiculous, but also warm. No one judged. And then there were the looted uniforms. After battles, the field was scattered with coats, French, Prussian, Austrian. If it fit, you wore it. Even if it didn't. One soldier wore a British redcoat so long, we started calling him Tommy. He hated it. But the coat was thick, and thick meant warm. National pride took a back seat to body heat. Your commander tried to restore some order. Issued a decree, only French blue to be worn. That lasted until the next supply delay. After that, he started wearing an Italian officer's hat himself. No one mentioned it. In some ways, the mismatched uniforms became badges of honor. Each odd sleeve, every clashing fabric, told a story. You could trace a soldier's entire campaign route by the layers on his back. One threadbare scarf from Spain. A Czech vest. A Bavarian sash. A Russian fur collar you swore you found after that skirmish near Smolensk. Totally not stolen. Probably. Your socks, predictably, didn't match either. One was once green. The other had been a shirt sleeve in a previous life. You patched them with boot leather and lined them with straw. And yet, you preferred them to the stiff, factory-issued kind that never quite fit. You remember dreaming once, yes, dreaming, of standing on a quiet hillside in full dress uniform. Everything matched. Your coat gleamed, your boots were shined, your socks hugged your ankles like velvet. Then you woke up and realized you were hugging your own muddy jacket in your sleep. Probably drooled on it too. So you carry on. Mismatched, frayed, proud. A living quilt of the Empire's ambition, stitched together by desperation and duct tape. Well, not duct tape. But if you'd had some, you'd have used it. You see another soldier ahead wearing one of those rare full uniforms, everything pressed, buttons intact. Must be a new recruit. Poor soul. Give it 2 weeks and he'll be wearing a poncho made from an old tent and boots borrowed from a corpse. That's just how it goes. And you? You'll keep marching. One threadbare step at a time. You keep marching, mismatched coat flapping like a tired flag, socks sliding somewhere between soggy and surrendered, and someone behind you calls out, "Hey shorty, keep up." You turn, prepared to deliver a death stare, only to realize, he's your height. Maybe even shorter. And then it dawns on you, you're in the Napoleonic army. Everyone's short. Especially Napoleon. Probably. Ah yes, the myth of the short soldier. You've heard it 100 times. Napoleon was tiny, the butt of every joke, the model for toy generals. But here, among thousands of men ranging from barely 5 foot to just barely taller than their musket, you fit right in. The truth? Napoleon was average height for his time, about 5 feet 6 inches in modern measurements. Maybe 5 feet 7 inches on a good hair day. But thanks to the British and their unrelenting propaganda machine, the world remembers him as pocket-sized. Historians still argue whether this was a translation error or deliberate shade. You? You suspect the British just needed something to mock. Hard to insult a man conquering half of Europe without making jabs about his sock size. The army wasn't built on tall, strapping giants. It ran on wiry, sinewy men who could climb hills, sprint across battlefields, and curl into tight spaces for warmth. A broad back didn't matter as much as fast feet and strong lungs. And honestly, being small made your coat easier to patch. Less surface area. Still, the height jokes persisted. You remember one cavalryman who built wooden risers into his boots, tried to look imposing, tripped on the first charge. Another stuffed hay into his hat to make it look taller. It worked until it rained. Then he had a soggy hay wig plastered to his scalp. There were unofficial nicknames, too. Half-stack, cannonball-sized, and the lower general. All said with affection, mostly. But you didn't mind. When your boots are leaking and your socks feel like lukewarm soup, ego isn't the first thing on your mind. And Napoleon? He leaned into it. Surrounded himself with tall bodyguards, wore tailored uniforms that added visual heft, and always posed on a horse or next to dramatically short furniture. He understood image. Once, he even made a speech while standing on a crate to appear taller. Someone tried to call it out. That someone was never seen again. Height didn't stop Napoleon from winning, nor did it stop his soldiers from following him into chaos. The man had presence. When he entered a tent, even the fleas stood at attention. You saw him once, briefly, at a camp inspection. His coat immaculate, his boots polished, his very aura radiating command. And yeah, he wasn't towering. But when he spoke, everyone shut up. Even the birds. You remember one officer who tried to mimic Napoleon's voice, deep, commanding, always a bit theatrical. It worked until his voice cracked mid-order. The entire unit spent the rest of the day marching in silence to avoid laughing. And still, the myth persists. Every cartoon, every caricature, every tavern tale shows the emperor barely knee-high. But in the army, no one cared. You weren't measured by inches. You were measured by endurance. By how long you could stand in mud. By how far you could march on 2 boiled potatoes and half a cabbage leaf. Some of the fiercest fighters you knew were under 5'5". One grenadier barely came up to your shoulder but once carried an injured horse off the field. Another famously hid inside a barrel during a siege, popped up mid-attack, and took down 3 enemy scouts. Historians still debate whether this was strategy or drunken luck. Height, in the end, was just one more illusion of glory. On the battlefield, smoke and chaos leveled everyone. Tall or short, you ducked the same musket balls, froze in the same snow, and peeled off the same wet socks at night. You glanced down at your own feet, shrunken slightly from the cold, wrapped in a pair of socks that were once white but now resemble something a swamp would spit out. Your legs ache, your back protests. But you're still moving. Because here, in the heart of Napoleon's army, it's not how tall you stand, it's whether you keep standing at all. It's getting dark again, and your boots are soaked from an afternoon march through what might have been a road but felt more like a cabbage soup in mud form. And speaking of cabbage, here comes dinner. You plop down near a cook fire, watching a blackened pot bubble ominously. The cook ladles something vaguely green into your tin bowl. You brace yourself. Cabbage soup. Again. This stuff is the unofficial perfume of the Napoleonic army. You can smell it from a mile away, boiled leaves, old water, a hint of sadness. It's not even bad the first few times. But by the 100th, your stomach starts composing protest songs. Historians still argue whether the endless cabbage diet was due to rationing or some twisted sense of culinary tradition. Either way, your digestive system hasn't known peace in months. You take a sip. It's hot, bland, and slightly sour. The soldier next to you adds crumbs of hard biscuit for texture. Another dumps in wine to elevate the flavor. It doesn't help. Nothing helps. A few leaves float like tragic confetti on a flavorless broth. You've grown used to it, though. It's warm, at least. And warmth is currency. You remember when the cabbage supply ran low once. They substituted turnips. The results? Explosive. You had to march 30 miles the next day with a battalion's worth of stomachs in turmoil. The latrines became sacred ground. One officer described the event as culinary mutiny. No one ever spoke of it again. The meals were repetitive, yes, but they were also weirdly grounding. After a day of chaos, blistered toes, and mismatched jackets, sitting around a fire with a bowl of boiling cabbage made things feel almost normal. Almost. You still had to eat it with a spoon made from a broken bayonet. There was a saying among the men, if it moves, we shoot it. If it doesn't, we boil it. This applied equally to food and morale. Someone once tried to spice the soup with gunpowder. Just a pinch. Just to see. The result was a pot that hissed for 5 minutes, then exploded like a sneeze. The cook was fine. The soup was gone. The smell lingered for days. You've seen some creative recipes, though. One veteran swore by cabbage and horse stew, if you found a horse, and no one was watching. Another made a thick cabbage paste and used it as a boot polish. His boots were softer, shinier, and smelled aggressively vegetal. You once dared him to eat them. He did. It was not a good night. Food became a kind of currency. You traded bits of bacon for thread, spoonfuls of wine for extra socks. A full loaf of bread? Practically a kingdom. You once gave up your last onion for someone's wool foot wrap. No regrets. The onion was mostly mold anyway. And yet, there was a kind of humor in it all. The soldiers composed poems, bad ones, about cabbage. They sang ballads. Oh greenest leaf, my evening friend. One particularly long march turned into a competition, who could describe the soup in the most insulting way. Tastes like sadness boiled in ghost tears. One. The older veterans claimed they no longer tasted it, they just absorbed it. One bragged he could identify a regiment by the sound their soup made while boiling. That's the 57th, thin broth, big leaves, no meat. No one questioned him. Mostly because he was chewing on a boiled spoon and staring at a wall. Napoleon himself? He ate better, of course. Fine meats, exotic cheeses, rare wines, at least when the supply trains kept up. But he occasionally took soldiers' soup, reportedly to show solidarity. There's a tale that he once spit it out discreetly into his sleeve. Another that he requested a second bowl. Historians still argue which is true. You like to believe both happened, just for balance. You finish your bowl. It wasn't good, but it was something. It warms your core, coats your insides like a clumsy blanket, and reminds you you're still alive. You rub your socks against the fire, steam rising off them like forgotten spirits. Tomorrow, the march continues. More mud. More blisters. More cabbage. Always more cabbage. You fall asleep with your bowl still in your lap. In your dream, you're swimming in cabbage soup. You scream. No one hears you. You wake up in the morning and the smell is still real. The day begins, as always, with cold feet and colder air. You squirm into your still damp socks, wrap your coat around you like a questionably warm hug, and try not to inhale too deeply, because everyone around you smells like vinegar. Yes, vinegar. Somewhere along the many campaigns, someone decided vinegar was the miracle solution to nearly everything. Hygiene, preservation, foot care, maybe even morale, though that one's debatable. Soon, half the army was dabbing vinegar behind their ears, in their boots, and, strangely, on their weapons. It started with the medics. They used it to clean wounds, and rightfully so. It stung like betrayal but killed some bacteria. Then someone realized it cut the smell from socks. Whether it cut or just masked the stench is a matter historians still debate. You, having tried it, can say it replaced foot odor with what can only be described as sour foot odor. A slight improvement. Soon, the trend spread. Soldiers poured vinegar into wash water, scrubbed their underarms with it, even brushed their teeth using vinegar and charcoal. One fellow swore it whitened his teeth. He smiled at you once, looked like a haunted piano. One day, someone dropped a boot into a vinegar bucket, claimed it softened the leather. It did, slightly. But it also left him with pickled toes for 3 days. The skin wrinkled like he'd aged a century from the ankle down. Still, he wore that boot proudly. Said it kept fleas away. You once used vinegar to clean your canteen. The water never tasted the same again. Every sip felt like salad dressing. You added wine to cover the taste, accidentally invented a beverage that became disturbingly popular for about a week. The soldier's swig. Tasted like vinegar, regret, and faint hope. And then there were the vinegar baths. During one memorable encampment, an enterprising corporal convinced his unit to all bathe in vinegar once a week. It caught on. Soon the whole battalion smelled like pickled onions. The flies disappeared. The lice moved out. Your nose burned for days. The sergeant called it a strategic olfactory assault. The officers caught wind of the trend, literally, and began issuing vinegar in rations. 1 bottle per 5 men. This led to ration theft, vinegar bartering, and an unfortunate incident where someone tried to turn it into soup. Don't do that. Still, vinegar had its fans. Some soldiers swore it kept their socks from developing holes. One rubbed it on his boots daily. They turned a strange orange color, but they never cracked again. Another used it as hair tonic. He said it added volume. Everyone else said he smelled like lunch. You remember one particularly vinegary week, when it rained non-stop and every soldier wore socks soaked in the stuff. The smell was so strong it disoriented the horses. A rumor started that Napoleon banned vinegar used near stables. No one ever confirmed it, but you didn't want to test the theory. Horses were already nervous enough without the threat of foot salad. Napoleon himself likely used vinegar too, but the fancy kind. Balsamic, maybe. Imported. You imagine him dabbing it on a silk handkerchief, sipping fine tea while his valet polished boots in perfumed spirits. You, on the other hand, once dipped a sock in vinegar and used it as a washcloth. The sock didn't survive. You barely did. Vinegar was also a deterrent. One soldier lined his tent with soaked rags to keep spirits away. Another poured it around his bedroll to form a protective circle. He slept like a baby. The rest of you gagged. Still, it was a distraction from the usual sense of unwashed men, boiled cabbage, and wet wool. Eventually, your nose adjusted. The vinegar smell became part of the landscape. Like cannon smoke or wet hay. You didn't notice it until it was gone, and then, strangely, you missed it. There was something almost clean about it. Artificial, but comforting. Like a sour blanket of pretend hygiene. And now, as you march again, feet still damp, boots creaking, coat flapping in the breeze, you catch a whiff of it from the man ahead. His backpack leaks slightly, leaving a trail of vinegar spots on the dusty road. You smile. Not because it smells good, but because it smells like something. Like order. Like survival. You tighten your pack, adjust your socks, and keep moving. You've learned that in Napoleon's army, even basic maintenance turns into battlefield strategy. Case in point, your boots. They're stiff, scratched, and vaguely resemble stale baguettes. But you've got a trick. One you picked up from a one-eyed veteran who swore by it, boot polish made from gunpowder and spit. Yes, gunpowder. It sounds insane, and maybe it is, but you've seen it work. You rub a bit of powder into the leather, buff with a cloth, usually part of a ruined sock, and voila, instant shine. Also, an aggressive smell that scares off rodents and possibly other soldiers. Historians still debate whether it was more fashion or intimidation. Gunpowder had its place in the daily lives of soldiers beyond just blowing holes in things. It was used to darken boots, fake stubble into a fashionable beard shadow, even to disguise wounds as battle marks. One corporal smeared it under his eyes before drills to look more grizzled. Instead, he looked like a raccoon having an existential crisis. But it wasn't just polish. Your boots became your toolbox, your pantry, your pillow, and sometimes, regrettably, your oven. You once saw a man bake hardtack on the sole of his boot after standing too close to a fire. Called it soul cuisine. The taste matched the name. And then there's the smell. After weeks of marching, trenching, and mystery stew spills, your boots develop a personality. A loud one. You tried washing them once, big mistake. The leather cracked like a dry lake bed, and you walked like a broken puppet for 2 days. Never again. That's when the other solution appeared. Hay stuffing. Yes, you filled your boots with hay. Everyone did. It helped with warmth, absorbed moisture, and, allegedly, kept your feet from getting eaten by cold. Did it work? Sort of. It also made your footsteps sound like a petting zoo. But in the dead of winter, every crunch was a blessing. The key was balance. Too much hay, and you couldn't feel the ground. Too little, and your socks turned into sponges. One soldier filled his boots so full he had to cut slits in the sides. Another lined his socks with hay first, then put them on inside out, creating a kind of primitive orthotic. He walked sideways for a week. Swore it helped. Polishing, stuffing, patching, you spent more time tending to your boots than your musket. After all, your boots carried you. Your musket? That just waited for the next battle. Your boots were the real soldiers. And the gunpowder polish? That was your signature. Officers would comment on it. Shiny boots, private, they'd nod, stepping over a dead goat. You'd salute, half proud, half itchy from the powder. Occasionally, the sun would hit just right, and your boots would gleam like obsidian. The rest of you looked like you'd fought a mud monster, but your boots sparkled. The risk, of course, was storing the powder. Some soldiers kept it in socks, because why not, others in hollowed-out rations. You hid yours in a tiny pouch under your collar, next to your last dry biscuit. One night, the two got mixed up. You took one bite and tasted war. Literally. You'd heard rumors of elite units using scented oils, lavender, rosemary, crushed citrus, to disguise their trail and smell intimidatingly clean. You tried making your own cologne once, vinegar, wine, and crushed peppermint leaves. It attracted bees. Lots of bees. And yet, for all the boot tending, sock drying, and fire huddling, there's a strange peace in these routines. Amidst chaos, your fingers find purpose. Buffing. Stuffing. Stitching. You, the battlefield cobbler. One night, you found yourself polishing your boots during a cannon barrage. Sparks overhead, screams in the distance, and you, gently rubbing soot into the toe cap, humming an off-key marching tune. It calmed you. It felt normal. Boots didn't ask questions. They didn't judge. They just carried you forward, step after painful step. And when they finally gave out, cracked soles, busted heels, seams split wide. You gave them a soldier's farewell. Buried them in mud, tied to a stick, with a cabbage leaf for a flag. Then you found another pair. 2 sizes too big, mismatched, and worn through, but boots nonetheless. You slid them on, stuffed them with hay, and reached for the last of your gunpowder polish. The march waits for no man. But your boots? They'll remember. By now, your boots creak like haunted furniture and your socks have taken on a shade best described as mystery gray. Still, the column marches, and to keep your mind off the slowly liquefying state of your feet, you sing. You all do. It starts with a low hum, just one guy trying to keep rhythm. Then someone else joins in, and before you know it, 50 tired voices are mumbling about mud, socks, and cabbage. Welcome to battlefield karaoke, Napoleonic style. Singing is your metronome. It keeps you in step, gives your breathing something to follow, and distracts from the horror happening inside your boots. Historians still debate whether this widespread singing was sanctioned by commanders or just tolerated out of necessity. Either way, it became tradition. The tunes are familiar, folk songs from home, old marching chants, and dirty ballads rewritten so many times they bear no resemblance to their original lyrics. Your favorite? The one about a general who lost his pants in Bavaria and led a charge in his undergarments. Totally happened. Probably. Some units had signature songs. The grenadiers liked deep, booming chants about fire and steel. The Voltigas? Fast-paced melodies about love and wine. Your unit sang about socks. Specifically, the tragic saga of a left sock that never made it home. It was oddly moving. The rhythm helps. When you're walking 20 miles a day with a half-eaten boot sole and socks that squish when you blink, anything that breaks the silence matters. You even add percussion, musket stocks tapped against thighs, mess kits rattled in time. Once, someone played spoons. No one knew where he got the spoons. He was promoted on the spot. Even the officers joined in sometimes. You heard your lieutenant hum once during a snowstorm. It was a lullaby. Probably meant for his child. Probably the only warm thing about that march. Of course, not all songs were cheerful. Some were laments, haunting tunes sung at dusk around campfires, low and sad, about comrades lost, battles fought, and dreams of home. You'd stare into the fire, soup in hand, boots steaming nearby, and let the sound carry you somewhere softer. Somewhere dry. Then someone would start a drinking song, and the mood would pivot. Even if there was no wine, you sang about it like it was flowing freely from every canteen. Someone would mime raising a toast with an empty tin. You'd all pretend to sip. You weren't delusional. Just determined. Some nights, you sang to stay awake. Marching through forests, cold wind biting your face, socks freezing with each step. If you stopped singing, your legs felt heavier. So you sang through numb lips. Off-key. Loud. Proud. One man kept forgetting the words and just yelled la 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 in rhythm. No one minded. You once met a group of conscripts from the south. They had voices like angels and harmonized their marching songs. You joined them for a week. It was the most musically satisfying your feet had ever been. Then they got transferred. You went back to your unit and resumed the traditional tune. Ow, ow, why is this wet again? There were rules. Sort of. No singing during surprise marches. No singing while loading cannons, safety first. And never, ever sing that one song about Napoleon's romantic escapades. Too risky. Last time someone tried, a marshal accidentally dropped a pot of stew on his lap. Music kept morale just high enough to keep you moving. You even made up lyrics on the go. I had 2 socks and now I've one / the other left. It tried to run. Catchy. A little sad. Very true. You'd sing while drying your socks by the fire. While stuffing hay into your boots. Even while relieving yourself behind a rock. Quietly. There were boundaries. And always, the songs made the miles feel lighter, even if your pack didn't. And then, one evening, during a particularly muddy halt, your unit spontaneously broke into a rendition of Ode to the Forgotten Sock. You harmonized. You clapped. You laughed. And for 3 glorious minutes, you weren't just wet and tired and sore, you were a choir. The wind carried your voices down the valley. The officers didn't stop you. Neither did the cold. You ended the song with a flourish, and someone jokingly tossed their sock into the fire. Everyone gasped, then cheered. A sacrifice to the gods of warmth. Tomorrow, the march continues. The socks stay soggy. The boots stay curse. But the songs? They'll be there, louder than the aches, stronger than the blisters, and, somehow, always in tune. Mostly. You wake up in a tent that smells like damp wool, vinegar, and hope. Hope, because today, you've got a new plan, hey. Glorious, scratchy, surprisingly versatile hay. Because when socks fail, boots leak, and the cold creeps up through your soles, you stuff your footwear with whatever you can find, and hay is everywhere. Someone tried it weeks ago, as a joke, then realized it worked. Now it's doctrine. Stuffing hay into socks became the Army's unofficial winter strategy. Historians still argue whether it was brilliant field improvisation or just the result of extreme collective sleep deprivation. You don't care. It works. You start by picking through a pile of it, looking for the fluffiest bits. No twigs. No pebbles. You learned that lesson early, when a poorly chosen hay straw stabbed you in the heel mid-March and you hobbled like a disgraced duck for 2 days. Stuffing hay into your socks is a delicate process. Too little, and it bunches up at your toes. Too much, and you can't feel your feet, or the ground. You're going for that perfect blend of cushion, insulation, and not sounding like you're walking through a barn. You slide your hay-stuffed socks on. They crunch. They itch. They smell faintly of livestock. But suddenly, your feet feel protected. Toasty, even. You wiggle your toes. It's like walking on a weird, dry salad. A little humiliating. A lot effective. You're not alone. Half the camp is haying up. One guy braided hay into a full pair of insoles. Another lined the inside of his coat with it. You've even seen someone fashion a hay neck warmer, though that one ended in a rash. There was a brief hay fashion movement, too. One soldier made decorative hay tassels for his boots. Another spelled out Vive l'Empereur in hay strands on his backpack. Napoleon never noticed. But we did. We voted him most creative. Then someone lit their hay sock on fire by accident and the trend cooled down. Fast. You once tried drying wet socks by filling them with hay and leaving them in the sun. It worked, kind of. The hay absorbed the water, but the socks smelled like a cow pen for days. Not the worst thing you've smelled. Not by far. The hay even served as emergency padding. You'd twist it into little rings and stuff them behind your heels, where blisters love to bloom. The rings worked like charms. Until they fell apart mid-march and filled your boots with debris. Still, you learned to tie them tighter and keep extras in your pocket. You called them ankle donuts. Delicious in theory only. And on long, miserable nights, you'd use extra hay as a pillow. Sure, it poked you in the ear and occasionally housed a surprise beetle. But it was better than resting your head on a frozen canteen. Hay became so central to survival that someone suggested writing a hymn. "O sacred straw of field and foot," they began. The lyrics never got finished, but the title lived on. You'd whisper it sometimes, mock reverent, before sliding into your hay-lined boots. Then came the prank wars. Soldiers started swapping hay types, wet hay for dry, thorny for soft. One night, someone filled a corporal's boots with cabbage. He marched 4 miles before noticing. The man never forgave vegetables after that. Still, hay was rarely wasted. Even officers began stuffing their boots. Quietly, of course. They had reputations to maintain. You once saw a major with hay falling out of his sleeves. He said it was tactical camouflage. You nodded solemnly. Eventually, you got picky. You sought out the soft, golden strands. Avoided green hay, too wet. Rejected the brittle stuff that turned to dust. You developed taste. You became a hay connoisseur. One soldier joked you'd become a sommelier of socks. "This vintage has notes of barn and battlefield," you'd say, pretending to sniff a sock like fine wine. But all joking aside, the hay saved your feet. Not completely. Not perfectly. But enough. Enough to keep marching when frost gnawed at your toes, when blisters burst like soggy grapes, when your socks gave up entirely and became glorified hay bags. You look down now. Your boots crunch softly. Your socks are warm, if uneven. The hay tickles your skin, whispers of straw against tired arches. You take a step, and the ground feels slightly less cruel. In a world where supply wagons fail, uniforms fall apart, and even your sense of smell has surrendered, a little hay goes a long way. So you gather more. Twist it just right. Stuff it into your socks with care. Because on this road, comfort isn't about luxury. It's about whatever you can fit between your foot and the world. You've layered up again. 3 shirts today, none of them yours. The innermost one might have been white once. The second has more holes than fabric. The third, a tattered wool thing with suspiciously short sleeves, used to belong to a drummer who swapped it for a spoon in a song. None fit right, but in Napoleon's army, fashion is measured in warmth, not elegance. Layering, you've discovered, is an art form. The weather swings from bone-chilling frost to sunburn confusion in a single afternoon. If you dress too light, you freeze. Too heavy, and you sweat until your clothes become their own tiny ecosystems. So you dress like an onion. A very confused, historically themed onion. Your base layer is always socks. Multiple pairs if you have them. If not, hey, as usual. Then trousers over long wool underwear that used to be your grandfather's. Probably. On top, undershirt, shirt, mystery tunic, coat, then whatever rag you can tie around your shoulders to pretend it's a cape. One man calls his shoulder wrap the emperor's hug. You don't ask. Historians still debate whether this chaotic layering was a tactical survival adaptation or just pure accident, each soldier dressing based on what hadn't yet rotted, been stolen, or walked off on its own. You lean toward the latter. No one planned this. Layering served more than one purpose. It cushioned your shoulders from the musket strap. It hid lice colonies from the medic. It caught falling crumbs from hardtack mid-march. And most importantly, it meant you had something dry underneath, eventually. There's a ritual to it. In the morning, you do the sniff test. If it doesn't make you flinch, it goes on. If it does, you flip it inside out and pretend that makes it clean. Every extra layer is a barrier against frostbite, stray sparks, and the occasional wayward cabbage from the soup pot. One man in your unit swears by wearing 4 undershirts and no coat. Says it keeps him agile. Another wraps his scarf around his torso 6 times until he resembles a terrified onion ring. He's not warm, but he's hard to shoot. And then there are the innovators. You once saw a soldier layer his upper half entirely in scarves. No shirt, just scarves. He flapped in the wind like patriotic laundry. Another sewed 2 tunics together into a bizarre double-fronted coat. It buttoned on both sides and confused everyone, including himself. In battle, layering offered accidental protection. You remember a musket ball lodging harmlessly into someone's 5th layer. The shot left a bruise but no wound, caught by an old undershirt, a scarf, and a cravat someone had stuffed into their belt for style. He wore it as a badge of honor. Named it Shirty. Laundry day, if it even happened, was chaos. You'd strip down to 1 damp layer, wash the rest in a stream, and hang them on tree branches. Then it rained. And everything became colder and smellier than before. You learn not to wash everything at once. Always keep 1 dry shirt. Even if it smells like vinegar and sorrow. Your tent smells like the inside of a sheep by now. Every man has at least 1 mystery layer. You've given up asking where things come from. A hat becomes a shirt. A sash becomes a bandage. You once used a shirt sleeve as a spoon holder. Someone else wore it as a glove. And at night, you sleep in all of it. Every layer. Even your scarf-wrapped boots stay on. Taking them off means exposing your feet to cold, to damp, to potential sock theft. One night, you woke up mid-theft, someone trying to slide a shirt off your arms like a reverse magician. You both screamed. But despite the discomfort, the stink, the asymmetry, these layers keep you alive. They trap just enough warmth, shield you from wind and insects, and, on rare, brief occasions, feel almost like armor. You remember the joke, we're not soldiers. We're walking laundry piles. You laugh every time. Because it's true. So, you keep dressing in the dark. 1 arm here, another through that suspiciously tight hole. Socks over hay over toes, shirts stacked like uncertain pancakes. And out you go. Layered up. Ready for anything. Because in this army, the only thing more common than wet socks is wearing a coat that once belonged to a man named Pierre, and now somehow fits over 3 tunics, 2 regrets, and a faint hope for spring. The snow's back. Or maybe it never really left. You're not sure anymore. All you know is that it crunches underfoot, and your socks, despite being wrapped in hay, vinegar sprinkled, and prayed over, are soaked again. And with the snow comes the worst enemy of all, the sentry shift. It's your turn to stand guard tonight. Standing still in wet socks during a Russian winter is like volunteering for slow-motion frostbite. You shift from foot to foot, trying to keep the blood moving. You hum old marching songs. You imagine beaches. And then you spot it, movement near the edge of camp. You tense. Reach for your musket. But it's not the enemy. It's a comrade. And he's stealing socks. Yes, truly. In the dead of night, under the cover of snowflakes and collective exhaustion, socks become currency. A dry pair? That's a treasure. A clean one? Practically mythological. You've heard stories, whispers, really, about sentries slipping through tents, lifting socks off sleeping men. Sometimes even while they were still wearing them. You never believed it. Until now. He crouches beside a sleeping grenadier, gently pinching the end of a sock like he's defusing a bomb. You watch in frozen awe as he slowly tugs it down, inch by inch, until the heel pops off with a faint squelch. The victim stirs, snorts, rolls over. The thief freezes. Then continues. And just like that, he disappears into the dark, prize in hand. Historians still debate whether this nighttime sock thieving phenomenon was a symptom of extreme deprivation or just an evolution of the barter economy. You don't care. You clench your toes tighter, as if to guard your own socks through sheer will. The next morning, the camp is abuzz. Did someone touch my feet? One man mutters. I had 2 socks last night. Another checks his bag, finds someone else's sock inside, and quietly weeps. No one admits anything. It's a silent war within a noisy one. You start sleeping with your socks inside your coat, wrapped around your waist like a fabric belt. Some sew hidden pockets into their shirts just to store them. One creative fellow rigged a booby trap with a spoon and a string. It worked once. Gave the thief a black eye. Gave us all a good laugh. It's not just theft. There's also sock swapping, which walks the blurry line between kindness and betrayal. You lend someone your dry pair for a shift. They promise to return them. They don't. You ask about it. They suddenly can't remember the conversation. You stare at their feet, suspiciously comfortable. But accusing a man over socks is dangerous business. Wars have started over less. You remember a campfire story. A man caught stealing socks was tied to a tent pole with them. Whether it's true or just folklore, the message stuck. Literally. There was even a brief black market. Socks traded like gold. One guy offered to swap a pair for a bottle of wine. Another wanted a knife. You bartered yours once for a roll of dry bandage. Immediate regret. Your toes haven't forgiven you since. Even Napoleon wasn't immune to the crisis. Rumors say he once sent for extra woolen stockings during the retreat from Moscow. Only 2 arrived. He wore them both, on one foot. Said it felt more powerful. You suspect he was delirious. Some men retaliated against thieves by sleeping barefoot, socks in hand, like a makeshift pillow. One slept with a musket between his feet. It worked, but he woke up with bruised toes and the realization that he'd bayonet his own sock. Tragic. You began developing sock traps, sleeping with bells tied to your ankles, or stringing twine across your tent flap. Some men wrote their initials in mud on their soles. One wrote poetry. If you steal this sock of mine / may it blister you in time. It didn't deter anyone, but it became a camp favorite. Eventually, you grew to accept it. Socks were like love, fleeting, stolen, occasionally returned in worse condition. You kept your best pair hidden for emergencies. You wore them as matched, hole-ridden ones during shifts, hoping the thief would look elsewhere. And when you finally caught someone, you didn't yell. You didn't scold. You simply offered a trade. One wet sock for one story. He told you of a time he crossed a river barefoot, wrapped in hay, singing a lullaby to keep from freezing. You gave him the sock. Because sometimes, survival isn't about what you keep. It's about what you give, and who's warm enough to march beside you the next day. The mail finally arrives. A battered sack tied with fraying rope, smelling faintly of damp wood and desperation, is dropped near the cook fire like a treasure chest. You don't dare hope. You've been disappointed before. Letters lost, packages looted, your name misread and your socks delivered to a man named Gaston who still insists there is. But then, a miracle. Du Bois! The corporal calls. You nearly trip over your own crusty boots lunging forward. He tosses you a bundle, wrapped in stained brown paper, tied with twine, and blessed by the unmistakable scent of home. You unwrap it with fingers trembling from cold and disbelief. Inside? Socks. Not one, but 2 pairs. Soft. New. Clean. One has blue stripes. The other smells like lavender soap. You could cry. Letters from home often brought food, photos, prayers. But none of it rivaled the impact of socks. You clutched them like newborn kittens. Around you, the others gather, eyes gleaming with envy and curiosity. You hold up a pair like a trophy. Someone whistles. Someone else pretends not to care. They all care. The importance of socks and letters from home can't be overstated. Entire families knitted through the winter, sending care packages filled with little woolen hugs. Some wrote notes on them, stitched initials, messages, even blessings. You once saw a sock with a full poem sewn into the cuff. The recipient had it memorized by week's end. You slip off your current pair, moist, hay-stuffed, and morally defeated, and gently pull on the new ones. They slide up like clouds. Like the whisper of angels. Your feet sigh. You sigh. A few men watching you sigh too, sympathetically. Historians still debate whether this sock affection was strategic morale boosting or simply a product of extreme sensory deprivation. Either way, those little bundles of warmth kept men marching. Kept them human. Some men never received any. Letters lost, families far, or no one left to write. You shared when you could. A clean pair split between two friends, one sock each. A silent bond stronger than iron. You once traded a pack of letters for a single warm heel. Worth it. You remember one comrade, Etienne, who got a package with only one sock. The other? A note. The second is still drying. I'll send it next week. It arrived 3 months later, half-eaten by mold and mice. He still wore it. Claimed it smelled like hope. During the retreat from Moscow, socks became talismans. Men pinned them to their packs, tied them around necks, kept them next to their hearts like lucky charms. One soldier whispered to his every night, as if it were a voice from home. There was one legendary pair that made the rounds, a thick, double-knit monstrosity rumored to have been made by a general's wife. No one knew how it ended up in the ranks. But whoever wore it for a night reported miraculous warmth. It was passed down like sacred relics. You got it once. Slept like a child. Sometimes, socks came from strangers. Whole towns would knit for the soldiers. Women wrote notes. Be strong. Come home safe. Don't forget your other foot. You'd unfold the paper, trace the handwriting, imagine the woman who made them, and thank her silently with every blister they prevented. And when those socks wore through, as all socks did, you didn't throw them away. You patched, you stitched, you turned them inside out. You wrapped them around hands, heads, wounds. You once used one to hold a splint together. Another to keep a musket barrel from rattling. There was a kind of ceremony to it all. Receiving. Unwrapping. Sliding them on. You'd walk different afterward. Straighter. Maybe not faster, but with more dignity. Your feet remembered softness. Of course, it never lasted. By next week, these new socks will be just as worn, just as gray. But tonight? Tonight they are miracles. You stretch your legs toward the fire, flex your toes inside their new homes, and close your eyes. Around you, the night murmurs. Someone sings softly. Another letters home. Maybe asking for socks. Maybe just telling someone they're still alive. And you? You're alive too. Thanks, in no small part, to the gift of something as simple and as sacred as warm, dry feet. Sand. Hot, endless, ankle-swallowing sand. You squint against the sun, adjust your headscarf, and take another step through the Egyptian heat that somehow cooks you from the inside out. You'd think, in this oven of a country, your socks would finally get a break. But no! They're still wet. Only now, it's not snow or rain, it's sweat. Rivers of it. Your socks squish with every step, soaked through with the effort of existing in a land where shade is a myth and your canteen is always half empty. The desert doesn't freeze your toes, it boils them. Napoleon brought his army to Egypt in 1798 with visions of glory, science, and empire. What he also brought were woolen uniforms, heavy boots, and socks that were never meant to meet a camel. Historians still debate whether he truly understood the climate, or just assumed France could conquer the sun with enough cannonballs. The march through Egypt turned soldiers into sizzling sausages. Socks, soaked in foot sweat and caked in sand, rubbed skin raw in new and creative ways. Every grain that slipped into your boot became a tiny dagger. You once poured out half a cup of sand from your sock, only to find a beetle crawling out with it. You named him Georges. He died nobly in the heel zone. You tried going without socks. Big mistake. The leather of your boots fused to your feet like angry glue. You screamed. So did your tent mate. You both never spoke of it again. Soon, you adapted. Some soldiers lined their socks with linen scraps to absorb moisture. Others turned to oiling their boots, claimed it reduced friction. One man wrapped his feet in cabbage leaves soaked in wine. Said it cooled the skin. He passed out from the smell. But the real horror? The blisters. Heat blisters. Foot boils. You've seen toes swell like grapes, then burst. One sergeant walked a whole day with a bloody heel flap hanging like a bookmark. Still kept pace. Still sang. There were creative solutions. A unit from Corsica tied palm leaves around their boots for insulation. Another smeared mud between their toes. You once witnessed a man try to craft sandals from tent canvas and rope. They fell apart within minutes. His dignity lasted a bit longer. And then there were the mirages. You'd see an oasis on the horizon, imagining fresh water, cool shade, maybe even a sock bath. But it was always more sand. More sun. More disappointment. You stopped trusting your own eyes. Or your own feet. The medics couldn't help much. Bandages melted into wounds. Even vinegar, your old frenemy, evaporated before you could apply it. Someone tried using camel milk as a soothing lotion. The camel was not consulted. Nor pleased. Napoleon, meanwhile, stayed mostly above it all. Literally. He rode. Rarely walked. His socks, if he wore them, were dry and silk-lined. You imagined them perfumed. Maybe stitched with tiny gold bees. You hoped they gave him blisters anyway. One night, during a rare breeze, you removed your socks and waved them like flags to dry. A jackal sniffed them and ran. That was the first time you felt powerful in days. The desert did weird things to you. You started talking to your socks. Apologizing to them. Thanking them. You began rotating pairs every hour, tucking one under your hat to dry while wearing the other. Your head smelled terrible, but your feet appreciated the effort. You remember stumbling upon a well, real this time, and dunking your feet in. The water turned murky instantly. Your socks floated beside you like tired swimmers. You washed them anyway. Hung them from a palm. Watched them flutter like victory flags. For a few hours, you walked dry. Light. Free. Then the heat returned. The sweat resumed. And your socks surrendered once more to the eternal cycle of soggy suffering. But still, you marched. Across dunes, through dates groves, past fallen monuments older than time. Your feet cracked. Your skin peeled. Your boots softened and hardened in strange rhythms. But your socks? They held on. Worn thin, sun-bleached, and sand-dusted, they became your most loyal comrades. Because even in the desert, especially in the desert, a man's hope lives somewhere between the skin and the sock. You sit on a crate near the back of the supply wagon, one foot propped up, poking a hole through the thinning wool of your left sock. It's not the first, nor the last. But as you twist your ankle and trace the edges of the hole with your finger, a strange thought bubbles up. This sock is you. Torn, stained, but still holding on. Maybe that's why, in the Grande Armée, a sock could say more about a man than his medals. There's a kind of pride in wearing something to the brink and beyond. Some men strutted around with socks that had more patches than original fabric. They'd show them off like scars. This rip? Vagram. This burn? I stepped too close to a cannon. One soldier dyed his with soot and claimed it made him stealthier. Historians still debate whether that was tactical camouflage or a very elaborate excuse not to wash them. Socks became storytellers. Your right sock, the thicker one, has a blue thread stitched near the heel, a reminder of when you sewed it shut during a snowstorm in Saxony, hands shaking, needle borrowed from a drummer's kit. Your left sock has never matched anything. You don't remember where it came from. It just showed up one day in your pack. Like fate. Or theft. Over time, socks developed a kind of hierarchy. The parade sock was your least offensive pair, reserved for inspections, dates with washerwomen, or the unlikely event Napoleon glanced in your direction. The everyday sock was dependable, forgiving, smelled faintly of boot polish and broken dreams. Then there was the emergency sock, usually the cleanest, driest one, hidden deep in your knapsack and protected like treasure. There were even sock nicknames. Yours were Pierre and Jean-Claude. You're not proud of this. But after months in the field, naming articles of clothing starts to feel perfectly reasonable. One man wrote a goodbye letter to his sock after it finally disintegrated during a river crossing. He buried it, made a tiny cross from 2 toothpicks. Social status could be measured in socks. Officers had spares. Sometimes silk. Rumor had it that Napoleon once received a pair woven from cashmere by an admirer. They had bees embroidered on the cuffs. You imagined him slipping them on slowly, dramatically, while the rest of you boiled your feet like turnips. Enlisted men made do. A pair of well-kept socks became conversation starters, bargaining chips, even tokens of affection. You remember a man proposing to a woman in Vienna with a bouquet of laundered socks tied with ribbon. She said yes, probably out of pity, possibly out of awe. And in moments of boredom, those endless hours between marching, drilling, and freezing, socks became entertainment. You saw one man put on a puppet show using his. Another used his as a dice bag. A third turned his into a hat. Not a good one, but it kept the sun off. Then there was the symbolism. During the retreat from Russia, you noticed something. The men who still had two socks, even mismatched, even shredded, stood straighter. Not taller. Just more whole. As though having both feet covered meant they were still soldiers. Still themselves. Those who lost one limped, physically and otherwise. You gave your spare once to a man sobbing into his hands. He never spoke a word, just nodded and kept walking. That's when it hit you. Socks weren't just about warmth or hygiene. They were proof of care. That someone had thought of your feet, that you thought of them. That you were still trying. Still human. You remember the campfire stories. Tales of a pair of socks blessed by a priest that never tore. Of a captain who'd worn the same pair since Toulon. Of a washerwoman who could tell your future by holding your sock to her cheek. You laughed at them then. Now you get it. You slip Pierre and Jean-Claude back on, holes and all. Tug your boots over them gently, almost with apology. And as you rise, shoulders aching, sun sinking low, you feel grounded. Anchored. Not by boots, not by orders, but by two woolen survivors wrapped around your feet. They've marched with you. Bled with you. Slept in snowbanks with you. And tomorrow, they'll do it again. It's the end of the road. Not metaphorically, you've literally reached the end of a road, one that started in France and has now collapsed somewhere near Waterloo into a churned-up mess of hoofprints, blood, and broken cartwheels. You're limping. Everyone's limping. The final retreat has begun. And your socks? One is missing. The other is barely a sock anymore. More of a suggestion. A ghost of fabric clinging to your foot like an exhausted friend who refuses to let go. The retreat from Waterloo wasn't clean. It wasn't organized. It was desperate, chaotic, ugly. Historians still debate whether Napoleon's defeat was due to timing, weather, or sheer bad luck. You know it came down to something more primal. No one had any socks left. You see them everywhere, men hobbling with bare feet wrapped in rags, crawling into ditches to wring out what little warmth remains. Some carry their boots in hand, socks tied around their necks like bizarre medals. One guy marches in one boot, one bandaged foot, muttering Vive l'Empereur under his breath like a prayer and a curse. The roads are littered with the debris of defeat, cracked muskets, snapped saber blades, torn flags, and, yes, socks. So many socks. Hanging from broken wheels, snagged on tree limbs, buried in the mud like tiny woolen tombstones. You spot one pair fluttering on a bush. You stare at it. It stares back. You walk on. Food is gone. Firewood is gone. The songs are gone. But the blisters remain. Your last sock tore open during the charge. You felt it go, just a gentle pop as the heel gave way. At first, you laughed. Then you cried. Then you wrapped it in a strip of your undershirt and kept going. You pass men sobbing over lost friends, over lost battles, over lost shoes. One man throws his boot into a river and shouts, "I'm free," before collapsing into the mud. You don't know whether to envy him or carry him. Socks become legend now. You hear whispers of men who turned back just to retrieve a good pair. Of officers who promised promotions in exchange for something dry. Of a general who tied bootlaces around his bare feet and marched in silence, too proud to admit defeat even to the ground. You remember seeing Napoleon after the battle, briefly, from a distance. His face a pale mask, his coat buttoned too tight. The myth looked small that day. Not short, small. Diminished. And in that moment, you wondered what socks he wore. Whether he, too, had a hole in his heel. Whether his feet hurt. Probably not. But yours do. With every step, they throb. Your toes are swollen. your nails black. You walk not because you believe in orders or empires, but because stopping would mean freezing in place and becoming part of the landscape, like the others. So you limp, each footprint a little shallower than the last. The camaraderie doesn't die, though. Not entirely. A man beside you tears his sleeve and wraps your foot without a word. Another hands you his last dry cloth, a square of linen with a hole in the center. You tie it around your arch and smile. He smiles back. It's not much, but it helps. That night, you rest under a bush. Your boot removed, your foot elevated, your makeshift socks steaming faintly in the cold. You trace the path that brought you here, snow, sand, sweat, and now mud. You think of all the socks you've worn, all the miles they carried you, all the times they failed, and didn't. And then you notice something, at the base of the bush, partly buried in dirt, is a sock. It's filthy, torn, but intact enough. You reach out, pick it up, shake the soil free. No owner in sight, no blood, just wool. You slip it on. It's warm, it's dry. You smile. And tomorrow, when you wake up with one sock mismatched and one toe barely hanging on, you'll keep marching, not because the road leads anywhere, but because your sock tells you you still can. You're older now, or maybe just tired in a new way. The wars have ended, or at least moved far enough away that the ground doesn't shake when you try to sleep. You're no longer a young soldier in a mismatched uniform with straw in his socks and a musket on his back. Now you're a quiet figure in a quiet village, watching clouds pass over tiled roofs, and wondering how your toes still work. But even now, in this small corner of peace, you keep a pair of socks folded neatly in a drawer. They're not special to anyone else, faded brown, one patched with blue thread, the other a little short at the cuff. But you know every stitch, every fray. You wore them across continents. You wrung them out under stars. You cursed them when they froze and kissed them when they dried. They were your companions, your armor, your softest rebellion against the ache of war. Sometimes, you take them out. Not to wear, your walking days are slower now, but to remember. You run your fingers across the fabric, feel the ridges where the yarn buckled and split, and recall the rhythms of marching. The thump of boots in unison. The squish of damp wool. The drumbeat of your own heartbeat when the cannon fire started. Historians still debate whether Napoleon's campaigns changed the world. You know they changed you. You went from France to Egypt to Russia and back again, guided not just by orders, but by instinct, camaraderie, and the miracle of still having both feet. Once, a boy in the village asked what the war was like. You could have told him about the flags, the strategy, the generals. But instead, you showed him your socks. Told him, if these could talk, they'd curse in 6 languages and hum marching songs in their sleep. He laughed. You did too. Because in the end, your story isn't just about Napoleon or battles or the long retreat from glory. It's about the human things. The ordinary, overlooked, wool-covered truths that kept you alive. You tuck the socks back into the drawer. Close it gently. Your feet ache as you rise. But they're warm, dry, safe. And for the first time in a long time, you don't have to march. You just rest. And now, with your socks off and the blanket drawn gently over your shoulders, the war becomes distant again. You hear no cannons, no boots stomping through puddles. Only the soft creak of floorboards, the hush of the wind nudging the curtains, and the fading echo of your own quiet laughter. Those years, those miles, those endless damp mornings, they float now like mist over a quiet field. Not gone, not erased, but softened, muted like a song hum through wool. Your body remembers the cold, the sting of frost on bare skin, the crunch of hay inside a boot. But it also remembers the warmth, the firelit camps, the borrowed scarves, the sound of a fellow soldier handing you a dry sock with no words needed. It remembers the laughter, the singing, the absurd, undignified beauty of a man crying over a clean pair of wool socks. So now, let your feet rest. Let your breath slow. Let the weight of all those marches fall away like loose thread unraveling into sleep. You're no longer in the mud. You're no longer squinting into the desert sun or digging trenches in frozen fields. You're here, in this moment, safe, still. The socks are folded. The boots are by the door. And outside, the world moves quietly on, with no need to chase it. Sleep well, soldier. You've walked far enough.